You believe now? These young men, they believe. Bold to believe. Now, everybody want to believe. I'm good with that. We got room. We ain't coming no more.
We here, baby. We here. We ain't no tomorrow. We now. They ain't believers.
Ain't nobody coming to your crib that's gonna whoop you. It's personal.
So they knew off rip, like, the Buffaloes mean a lot to me.
I believe. I believe. I believe. I believe. We got now.
Family on 3, 1, 2, 3.
Colorado making believers out of a whole lot more people after a 2-0 start to the season. I'm in studio here with two National College Football analysts, Carl Reed, Bud Elliott, joining us remotely. Guys, we got to talk about this because the win total to start the season for Colorado was 3.5. They're now 2-0 with wins over Power 5 programs. Carl, I'll start with you. How do we need to reset our expectations for this Buff squad?
Well, I think that number one, that you have to look at, they've already won 2 games that people didn't think that they were going to win, Emily. I know that Bud betted the under, all right? And so it's a situation now where you got to be talking about bowl game for sure, and maybe even with an upset or two here, you could find them in the Pac-12 championship game. That's not totally unrealistic.
I think a bowl game is pretty realistic because they've won these first 2. And I mean, to Carl's point, you do have to reset the expectations based on how they've played in the first 2 games. And even if you want to knock Nebraska and TCU a little bit, which I think is probably fair for how they played as far as what they can control in those games, Colorado still played extremely well, especially on offense, and good enough on defense that I think you have to raise them up as well. Another key for Colorado is that they've stayed really healthy so far. And I think if you were projecting them for their best case scenario in the preseason, it would involve staying really healthy because it's hard enough to get a whole bunch of good starters in the transfer portal, which they appear to have done on offense. But it's really hard to get quality depth for your backups in the portal. And so far, they've stayed healthy. They've not really had to tap in to too much depth. If they're going to make a crazy run, which I'm sure we can get to this, I strongly disagree with the Pac-12 title stuff. I do think that there's a pretty good chance they can make a bowl now because they have these 2 wins in pocket.
But we can't do that. We can't play both sides of the fence here. When you're talking about Nebraska and TCU, you were one of the guys that was very critical about Colorado all offseason. When everybody was saying they had the number 1 transfer class in the portal, you ranked them number 10. You made sure that you created your own graphic and made them number 10. You were also one of the guys who talked about the level of coaching in a place like the Pac-12 and Power 5, how different it was going to be from the coaches he went against in the SWAC. So now, nobody thought they could beat TCU, who played the national championship game a year ago. So now that he beats TCU, now that he beats the University of Nebraska, now you can't come in and say, well, those teams weren't any good, because all of you guys thought that he was going to lose those games. You thought Sonny Dykes would outcoach him. You thought Matt Rule would outcoach him. And now he comes in and wins those games. Now we can't come back on the other side of the coin and say, well, those 2 teams weren't any good, so we got to take some of the credit away because those teams weren't good. He was supposed to get outcoached. His football acumen as a coach wasn't supposed to be on the level for those guys. This was supposed to be very, very gimmicky, but we got to keep it real.
I'm going to push back on some of that. If we can raise up Colorado's power rating, right, after evaluating them, after seeing them on the field, just like we can in our team, we can also knock other teams' power ratings down a little bit, right? Like Colorado didn't cause Jeff Sims to just drop the ball on the snap. Now, they did take advantage of it. They adjusted their game plan. I've been extremely impressed with the job that Deion's done coaching so far. Like, I don't think it's unfair to say that they had a massive talent advantage in the SWAC, so you didn't know how well they would coach in these close games without a huge talent advantage. So far, in games where they don't have a huge talent advantage, I think it's to his credit that they have come out on top of these games. Like, they've played close games. TCU was close throughout. Obviously, Nebraska was close for about 30 minutes or so, or maybe 40 minutes. Like, I don't think that's a knock on it. Like, they've shown something so far that they really didn't have to show in the SWAC because they're not overwhelming people with talent. Like, don't you think that's a credit to what Deion and Sean Lewis and Charles Kelly and those guys have done?
But we also knew what the rosters looked like going into the season. You knew Jeff Sims was going to be the quarterback. You also know what he had done in the past and that he's had turnover problems in the past, but people still picked Nebraska, right? So we all knew that TCU lost a bunch of guys off their team, but we still felt like that staff was going to come out here and outcoach those guys. So, yeah, Colorado has played very well, but now we can't act like TCU and Nebraska weren't quality opponents for winning.
Bud, you mentioned that you changed your tune watching Deion out there coaching and the coaching staff as a whole, but when it comes to the transfer portal, I'm curious about what was it that made you put them number 10 when everybody else was lifting them as the number 1 transfer portal class? What made you doubt that element of it in terms of the talent?
Sure, I thought that our transfer portal formula was overweighting quantity as opposed to quality. They clearly have some really good quality in the class, but they also have a lot of quantity that probably wouldn't be playing on some of the other programs in there. So to me, it's just sort of like how do you cap it, right? Like the formula that we use for the transfer portal at 24/7 Sports, I'm not really sure that it accounts appropriately right now on the transfer portal side for the vast difference in terms of the number of players that you took in the portal, or at least at the time when I put out the graphic. I know we're always improving what we have in-house here, but like, how do you measure an 8-person class against like a 60-person class? You see what I'm saying? That was sort of my point with that. Like, and when Carl and I discussed this back in what was it, July for the transfer portal show, I said, like, for Colorado, their class is absolutely number 1 for their needs. Pull the tape. Like, they needed to go out there and do that, and I thought Deion was really smart for doing it how he did it. Was it risky? Of course, but I think it's to his credit that he's been able to assimilate all these guys and make the culture work for them. I absolutely stand by a lot of these guys they took wouldn't play for a lot of the top schools out there. They got some top-level talent, and they acquired the depth that they needed to flip the roster, which was pretty much by far the worst in the Power 5. Like, he's done a great job there. But I don't need to back down from thinking that they don't have a ton of top-level talent in that transfer class.
Well, Bud, one thing that I'm going to say, I don't know how many college football games you've watched this weekend, but I've watched a lot of teams in the top 10 over the past weekend that definitely could use quite a few of the receivers that they have on the Colorado Ball Club. I also know a bunch of teams that I saw that if Shadeur Sanders was playing quarterback, they'd be a lot better. So with the exception of Florida State, who we saw early against LSU, and maybe I'll put Texas in there too after they dominated Alabama, we haven't seen a bunch of dominant teams for you to make a statement and say there are several guys on their team who wouldn't be playing for other guys. I see holes on the offensive line on several teams. I see holes on the defensive line. I see teams that can't get receivers open because they don't have playmaking ability. I see guys getting exposed in the secondary. So I think that you're underestimating how many guys that they have on their roster that would be playing for other guys, which is what the formula to winning is. And in terms of how you rank a transfer portal class, you got the 2 best players in Shadeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, who that came out of the portal has produced like them. That alone puts you at the top. You can say that they weren't number 1, but putting them at number 10 was completely disrespectful.
All right. Well, they haven't gotten to Pac-12 play yet. Let's talk about that. You think they're going to be just fine in Pac-12 play? They're going to really contend for the Pac-12 title?
Well, what I think is that the Pac-12 maybe will overvalue.
If this portal class is so good, if this portal class can play for everybody but Texas and Florida State, what I'm hearing in my earpiece here is that you think they're going to make some serious noise in the Pac-12. They're going to play for that Pac-12 title.
I definitely think that they're going to make some serious noise in the Pac-12 because they are a great offensive football team, and we haven't seen a dominant team defensively in the Pac-12. They have an opportunity to go out here and win against any of those teams. Football's a week to week. I think the one team that we probably undervalue in the Pac-12 is Washington. Washington, I think, is a formidable and probably the most scariest team out there in the Pac-12 when I think about the way that they're constructed and the way they built. But was Utah super impressive to you when you saw them play against Baylor this past weekend? Were they super impressive against a really down Florida Gators team? I thought Oregon was going to be really, really dominant, and then Texas Tech had them on the ropes and gave them a lot of issues. So I think that those are games that you couldn't say are unwinnable games in those situations.
But if you take Colorado out of it, Carl, you look at the Pac-12 as a whole, there's a case to be made that this might be the best conference right now in college football.
Absolutely, it is.
So when you're looking at Colorado, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of people did doubt them, and they're being proven wrong in the way that they're able to start the season. But it's one thing to get those 2 wins in the non-conference play, but when they hit conference play, you've got Oregon coming up, you've got USC coming up. How do they fare when those big-time opponents are on the other side of the ball?
It's very tough when you're trying to compete for championships to win conference games week after week after week. Oregon has a very good ball club. Dan Lanning has also recruited at a very elite level. You know how big I am on what he added on his offensive line with A.J. Cornelius coming from Rhode Island, who looked very impressive in the game that they played this past Saturday. Obviously, USC has Caleb Williams, who's the defending Heisman Trophy, so they always have a chance, but they struggled on defense as well. What I'm saying to you is that you can't say that Colorado can't play in those football games. We're not looking at dominant teams the way that Alabama was dominant in the past, the way that Georgia has been on defense the last 2 years. Florida State is the team that appears to me to be the best team in the country right now. If I was rating teams, I think that Florida State is ahead of everybody because they're dominant in the trenches on both sides and they're dominant at the skill positions. I don't think that they have a weakness offensively or defensively on their football team. And so you have to look at Florida State, who's in the ACC, is the most dominant team in the country right now. Every team in the Pac-12, we have some talented quarterbacks, some talented teams, but we don't have an unbeatable team in the Pac-12.
So you think they're going to make the Pac-12 title game?
I think that they definitely had an opportunity to make the Pac-12 title game for sure. I don't think that that's out of the possibilities.
What do you think, Bud?
All right, let's do a dinner bet then.
Well, I'm a betting man.
Right,
I'm a betting man.
Are they closer to making the Pac-12 title game, or are they closer to having a losing record in conference?
Oh, they're closer to making the Pac-12 title game than having a losing record.
All right.
But don't be disrespectful.
Bud, what do you think?
Don't be disrespectful to the program, Bud. Hey, you wild today, man. You already rated him number 10 in the transfer portal. Was one of the most asinine things I've ever heard you say. And I've heard you say some really, really ridiculous things since I've known you. That was one of the most ridiculous, though.
I threw it out there on Cover 3. I said, this is a very hard time to rate, or really hard team to rate. I wish somebody would give me like 50-1 and then making a bowl, because I think if they stay real healthy, they could. Luckily, one of my listeners did. So already feeling fairly good about that. And I think you're exactly, like, you deserve a lot of credit for being right on them. Like, there's a pretty decent chance they make a bowl now. The Pac-12 is a good league. I actually was pretty impressed with Utah going and beating Baylor and Florida without their starting quarterback and without their NFL tight end. Like, they found a way to get it done. They basically ran Wildcat for like the last 15 minutes of that ball game to win this weekend down in Waco. Now they get an FCS team, and then they're like, let's see how Colorado looks week 13 when they roll in there at Utah. Like, that's not a real easy place to play. I'm definitely willing to think that I'm wrong on what they were, but I'm not willing to buy into this. Like, they're taking yet another step from what they've already shown.
Well, you don't have to buy into it. I'll buy your stock that you selling. I'll buy it from you.
All right. Well, while we're making bets and sweeping proclamations, I got to ask about the quarterback, Shadeur Sanders. Heisman talk is already being thrown out 2 games into the season. You look at the numbers, though, and it's hard to argue. I mean, 903 total yards. He has a 6-0 touchdown interception ratio, 76% completion percentage. You see the board right now. He's on the graphic, which means that it's definitely in the conversation. But I'll start with you here. How realistic is a potential Heisman for Shadeur Sanders?
So many Heisman races are going to come down to how many games you win. So if they're still in the mix for the Pac-12 title at the end of the season, Emily, then he has an incredible chance of winning that award. The Heisman Trophy is an award where you have to be in the mix down the stretch. The one thing about Shadeur Sanders was a great quarterback at Jackson State. He was really, really great at Jackson State. And so now there's a larger number of eyeballs on him. Obviously, people respect the level of competition more at the P5 level than they do in the SWAC. But there's a bunch of great football players in the SWAC that I also think could be productive guys on Power 5 schools. He was one of them. So I'm not surprised at what he's doing because I saw him practice. I've seen him play in games. And he works really, really hard at his craft. And right now he's showing you that he's one of the top quarterbacks in the nation.
It would not shock me to see Shadeur Sanders in New York. It would shock me to actually see him win the trophy. Like, I do think that he's going to get recognition for the excellent play that he's had this year. He's going to put up big-time numbers. To Carl's point, it is really difficult to actually win the Heisman Trophy in the playoff era if you're not seriously in the running to make the playoff. Lamar did it, and they were basically like one game away for most of the season. They had the game where they dropped 55 on a pretty good Jimbo team that went to the Orange Bowl, right? Robert Griffin III did it. They crushed Oklahoma, which was a major contender, and that was pre-playoff, but kind of one of the last memories of that. It's really hard if you're not a serious playoff contender to win, especially because a couple of the guys who play on serious playoff contenders are going to have similar numbers, right? Caleb Williams has a 6-week cakewalk to start the year, basically, as far as the defenses they play. Obviously, Colorado's offense is extremely good, but he's going to have pretty sick numbers. If they maintain their spot in the playoff race, it's going to be hard to unseat him. If somebody does unseat him, I actually think it's probably Quinn Ewers or Jordan Travis, or maybe if Michigan stops taking 40 seconds off the play clock every time and throws the ball around a little more in Big Ten play, like maybe a J.J. McCarthy. So it wouldn't shock me to see Shadeur get to New York. I'd actually kind of be interested in betting, like, could he be a Heisman finalist? I think there's a pretty good chance of that. I don't particularly like his chance of actually winning it unless Colorado is a lot better than I think.
You throwing a shot at Jim Harbaugh and the way they run their offense for J.J. McCarthy.
Well,
nasty,
Jim Harbaugh.
nasty business. How does Jim Harbaugh catch friendly fire from you today, bud? That's nasty business.
Look, they're going to have like a 5-possession game against Bowling Green this weekend, and it just – it's been interesting to see what they've done.
Don't be that guy, man. You running the rock, great success, back-to-back playoff team. Man, how dare you, man.
You can't
Keeping
say
fresh
this.
legs between every snap, like little paper, rock, scissors in the huddle just to take as much time as you need.
Do you realize who you're speaking to here? I mean, this is the official
my
spokesman
God.
for the Wing T offense. He loves to.
No,
I cannot believe
played
he took
Wing T in
a
high
shot
school.
at a running offense.
That's all right.
here in
We're
front
getting
of
a little off track here. I'm going to go back to the conversation at hand. The do you believe? I believe that we like to call the NFL a copycat league, but it happens in college football a heck of a lot of times. And we look at Deion Sanders and what he's been able to do. And Carl, this was a conversation that you and I had earlier about just how the success that he's having and the way that he's doing it could change maybe the hiring practices for guys in future positions looking for their head coach. How do you think, although Deion Sanders is one of one when it comes to their ability to try to bring in somebody similar, but how will it adjust the way that guys in hiring positions potentially look at who they want to bring in to be their next head coach?
I think that it lets you know that you don't have to have one of the so-called X and O guru guys. You can go get a guy who is good in front of the team, who's good with the boosters and the donors, who is good at recruiting players, which I think is the most important thing. And when you think about it, all these X and O guru guys, Les Miles is not considered an X and O guru. Like people criticize his time management. They criticize some of the things he did on the field. A national championship. Ed Orgeron is another guy who people wouldn't consider X and O guy. A national champion. So guys have been very successful. Gene Chizik, a national champion. What do they have in common? You got Cam Newton. You got Joe Burrow. So if you can recruit those kind of guys, if the coach can recruit those kind of players, Ed Orgeron is smart enough to go hire Joe Brady. Gene Chizik was smart enough to go hire Gus Malzahn. Deion Sanders was smart enough to go hire Sean Lewis. So if you get the right coach who understands that recruiting is what drives the machine, and you give him the resources to put the coaches around him that he needs, then that has shown consistently that that's probably a better way to win a championship than going and getting the guys who sit in the room by themselves and watch film all day.
Completely agree. Yes, I think the lesson of Deion is not go get yourself a celebrity. It's get yourself a guy that understands how to run an organization, understands top down, understands good hiring practices, right? And clearly Deion works a ton. There's so many guys out there, you're like, oh, get this celebrity, go get Tebow to coach Florida. I'm not saying Tebow wouldn't work hard, but Deion clearly puts in the work to get the respect from the coaches that he hired to come work for him. I'm sure they called around and asked guys hey, what is this? Is it just a TV show? No, it's more. Deion puts in the work. I think as staffs grow in size, the importance of having somebody that can manage a really large staff of people is ever more important, right? You're not just dealing with 2 GAs and maybe an analyst anymore. A lot of these guys have an army of polo shirts, and so having somebody who does recruit, who understands good hiring, you have to have some X and O sense about you to understand if the guy is doing a good job or not. But no, I think Carl's exactly right on that.
I think also you got to look at Emily and Bud that you can't keep disrespecting Deion and saying he was a celebrity coach. He was coaching football. He was coaching youth football. He coached high school football. And he was also largely involved with the Under Armour All-American game where all of the top players would come in the Under Armour Camp Series, which has been the best camp series in the country. So he intimately knew a lot of the top high school players in the country already. I don't think that you can just go get Tim Tebow off the street or some of the other premier guys off the street because they're not coaching football and they don't have relationships with kids. He has had a relationship with kids. He's done hundreds of camps years around, and he was a part of the signature camp series of the summer. So he already had relationships built. He already was coaching. He already had a passion for coaching. Some of these other pros, names that come up for some of these jobs, they're not coaching football. They're doing other things. So I don't think that that's necessarily the route to go, just pulling a guy that was a great player off the street, because those guys don't have a passion for coaching.
Yeah, and I know his connection with youth football is a big reason he was able to sway Travis Hunter away from his dream school of Florida State, because he made that connection with him from a young age. You look at what Deion Sanders has been able to do, not just starting off in the Power 5, but in year one, 2 weeks in, there's going to be a lot of coaches around the country that are going to be put up to that similar standard of what you're able to do and flipping a roster and having early success. But how realistic is it to look at what Deion Sanders has been able to do and replicate it somewhat somewhere else?
Probably not everywhere, but if you're a program that has some resources about you, I think you're going to be held to that Deion standard, right? The ability to go out, flip your roster via the transfer portal and do it quickly, right? Like, I mean, if you take 80 guys, you better take 80 right ones, especially with the NCAA ruling we've seen that you don't really get the 2 transfers anymore. So it's harder to get rid of them once they're on your roster. Again, to his credit, it looks like he's picked a lot of guys who are able to help them. So I do think schools are going to hold coaches to a quicker turnaround standard, which, again, Deion may be one of one, y'all. Like, I don't know that that's incredibly smart to hold everybody to an instant turnaround standard. Instead of like holding everybody to that, we might just want to credit Deion for the job he's done of taking this from the worst Power 5 team to, I think, like arguably a top half Power 5 team, right? Like, that's a huge turnaround in year one. It'd be like one of the bigger turnarounds in history. So I don't know, is it fair to hold everybody to that standard, or should we instead just credit Deion for kind of a miracle event that he's managed to pull off?
One thing you hear in coaching circles a lot, guys, is winning the right way. He was criticized because people feel like flipping over your entire roster is not winning the right way. It's not the way that it should be done. Those kids should have been allowed to stay. But coaches
we didn't hear that about Lincoln Riley, though.
The time table has already been short. When is the last time a coach has been able to lose for 4 or 5 years in a row? That hasn't happened in a long time. You got a job that's life-changing. You're making millions of dollars. You better figure out a way to win today. Not tomorrow, not next year, not next week. You got to win today or you ain't going to have a job. And then when the press conference happens, you're going to be one of those guys that's saying, I wasn't treated fair, I wasn't given all the resources. And that's the hard part of the game. Is it great for players? No, Emily, it's not great for players, but it's not great for players. You're in a situation where you can go to a school, they can figure out you weren't good enough, and you can be asked to leave or put in the transfer portal. But you need to understand that going in. College football is a big boy business. It's played by big boy rules, and that's the way the game is now, and you better figure out a way to win. For some guys, that's going to be flipping their roster in the transfer portal. For other guys, that's going to be development. But whatever road you decide to go down, you better win if you want to keep your job.
But I'll give you the final word here.
I'm just excited to see this Pac-12 season. I mean, he's already leveled up from what I thought he was going to be. Like they're probably 2 wins better than I thought they were going to do. And I mean, if they can really get to like a 9 or 10 win season, I can't see it. But if they do, I'm sure you're going to have me back on to talk to Carl again, because I'm going to be buying him dinner. That's damn impressive.
Bud, you thought that you were going to get the last word, all right? And I think that Emily's intentions were good when she tried to kick it to you like this. In St. Louis, where I'm from, we have a phrase, and it's called hating is a disease, all right? Get well soon, my brother.
Oh my goodness. Well, actually, both are wrong. I get the final word because I'm saying goodbye on this segment. It was a joy to hear from both of you guys. I love the different perspectives. It is an impossible standard that Deion has set, but as you said, Bud, I'm excited to see what happens, because no matter what happens, it will certainly be interesting. And you'll see it online at this website, buffstampede.com. These guys have been killing it on the Colorado coverage, and there has been a lot of news, so be sure you're checking out buffstampede.com.